The rain hadn't stopped in 3 days. The kind of persistent drizzle that felt more like a whisper than a downpour, yet it soaked everything. It matched the weight in Evelyn Grant's chest as she watched her husband Daniel sip coffee across the breakfast table. The silence between them used to feel companionable. Lately, it felt loaded, dense with unspoken things. Daniel's phone buzzed on the counter. He didn't move for it. Evelyn noticed. She noticed everything now. He looked tired, the kind of tired that came from pretending to care, pretending to be present. She knew that look. It mirrored her own reflection far too often. They had been married for 12 years. One child, a 7-year-old boy named Mason. 2 careers. Evelyn, a freelance graphic designer. Daniel, a public defense attorney known for taking morally gray cases with startling conviction. Once passionate, now procedural. Once full of inside jokes and Sunday pancakes, now built on logistics and long gaps in conversation. She had been suspicious for weeks, ever since he started working late again. Ever since the locked phone, the new cologne, the inexplicable charge. At a boutique hotel she found while balancing their shared finances. But Evelyn wasn't the type to accuse without evidence. So she found it. She borrowed his phone one morning while he was in the shower pretending hers had died. She didn't have to look far. There were photos. A woman, Jessica Ames, a paralegal from his office, pretty, early 30s. The messages weren't explicit, but they didn't have to be. You make everything complicated in the best way. "Last night was dangerous. We have to be careful." Her throat had closed as she read. Not out of rage, yet. Just disbelief. A kind of hollowing realization that the man she trusted had made space in his life for someone else. That night, she said nothing. She made lasagna. She tucked Mason in. She listened to Daniel talk about a court case like everything was fine. And then when he fell asleep, she lay awake and planned. Not revenge. Not yet. Part 2. The confrontation. 3 weeks passed. She didn't confront him until she had her facts. Hotel receipts. Phone records. A photo of him and Jessica kissing in the courthouse parking garage, taken by a private investigator she hired with her own savings. When she finally placed the manila folder on the kitchen island, Daniel's face fell. No anger, just shame and fear. "Evelyn, don't insult me by lying now," she said, voice quiet, barely masking the fury underneath. "I want to hear the truth. All of it." He hesitated. Then slowly, he nodded. "I didn't plan for it. It just happened. She was there. She listened." "More than I did." Her voice cracked. "Is that what this is? You needed someone to talk to." He didn't respond. Evelyn felt the sting of tears, but refused to let them fall. "How long?" 5 months. That admission struck her like a blow. 5 months, she repeated. "While I was planning Mason's birthday. While I was picking out Christmas gifts for your family. While I was lying next to you every night." Daniel reached for her hand and she pulled away. She couldn't even look at him. "I ended it," he said softly. 2 weeks ago. It was a mistake, Evelyn." She laughed, short and bitter. "And now you want forgiveness?" "I want us to try. I know I broke something. I'll do anything." "To fix it?" She wanted to scream. Instead, she said, "You don't even know what you've broken." Part 3. The lie that lingers. A week later, Evelyn still hadn't made a decision. They were living like cautious strangers. Mason was the only thing keeping the surface of their family intact. They agreed not to tell him, yet. Meanwhile, Evelyn found herself increasingly drawn to an unexpected confidant, Julia Monroe, a neighbor and former detective who now ran a private investigative firm. She'd helped Evelyn get the evidence on Daniel. But what started as professional had turned into late-night talks and wine on the back patio. Julia was 10 years older. Sharp, sardonic, intuitive. She never pried but always listened. "You still love him," Julia said one night, blunt as ever. "But you don't trust him." "I don't know if I can trust him again," Evelyn admitted. "But I don't know who I am without him." "That's the wrong question," Julia replied. "You should be asking who you want to be, even if you're alone." Part 4. Secrets of his own. Then came the twist Evelyn didn't expect. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Daniel was arrested. It happened on a Thursday. Mason was at school. Evelyn got the call from Julia first. "Evelyn, he's in custody. They're charging him with obstruction of justice." "What?" Her world tilted again. 2 years ago, he may have suppressed evidence in a high-profile manslaughter case. The prosecutor's office is investigating. Evelyn's first instinct wasn't anger. It was disbelief. Then, strangely, it was protectiveness. She went to see him at the holding center. He looked broken. "It was one time," he whispered. "The guy would have gone away for life. I was trying to... God, I thought I was doing the right thing." Evelyn couldn't decide what was worse: the betrayal of their marriage or the revelation that the man she married had become a stranger in so many ways. Part 5. The decision: Daniel was released on bail. His trial would begin in 6 months. Evelyn stood at the edge of their marriage, staring into an unknown that felt as deep as the ocean. Friends had taken sides. Her parents wanted her to leave. Mason was starting to ask why Daddy was always sad. Jessica had vanished from the firm. Word was she'd moved out of state. She slept in the guest room now. But Daniel kept trying. Therapy, transparency, parenting, together. He begged for a second chance. "I know I don't deserve it," he said one night. "But I still love you." I never stopped. Evelyn studied him. This man she once knew so well, this man who had lied, cheated, and concealed things that cut deeper than infidelity. She reached out, brushed her fingers against his. "Maybe love isn't the question," she said. "Then what is? Who we become. When everything breaks." Epilogue: the quiet between storms. In the end, Evelyn didn't give an answer. Not that night. The story closed, not with a dramatic divorce or a sweeping reconciliation, but with her packing a suitcase and taking Mason to the Oregon coast for a month. To think. To breathe. Daniel stood in the driveway as they left. No begging, just a nod. A tear he didn't try to hide. Evelyn didn't look back. She needed the silence, and maybe in that silence she'd find out if forgiveness was ever possible, or if some things, once broken, could only be rebuilt into something entirely new. The beach house was modest: weathered gray siding, wind-chapped shutters, and a porch that creaked like it had secrets of its own. Evelyn rented it through a friend of Julia's, someone who owed a favor and didn't ask questions. Mason took to the ocean like it was freedom itself. Each morning he ran barefoot into the foaming tide, unbothered by cold spray or cloud-thick skies. Evelyn envied that kind of innocence. She, on the other hand, barely slept. At night, she replayed Daniel's words over and over. The apology, the half-truths. The moment she realized the betrayal wasn't just about sex or secrets. It was about who he chose to be when no one was watching, and yet she still hadn't filed for divorce. Julia called on the 4th night. "Just checking in," she said. "You okay?" "I'm fine." It was the kind of lie that sounded too smooth. "I've kept digging," Julia said. "There's more. That manslaughter case Daniel covered up. The victim's sister hired a new investigator. She's looking into whether Daniel had help." Evelyn's stomach sank. "You think he worked with someone?" "I think you're not the only one he's lied to." That night, Evelyn opened her laptop. She pulled up the files Julia had sent her weeks ago, the ones she hadn't dared look at too closely before. Financial inconsistencies, gaps in Daniel's calendar, a sealed file from a domestic violence case he'd dismissed as routine. One name came up again, Jessica Ames, and that's when Evelyn saw it. Jessica had a sealed restraining order against Daniel from 2 years ago, but they'd only been together 5 months. So why the restraining order? Part 7. The other woman's truth. Evelyn drove back to Seattle on a Sunday. She didn't tell Daniel. Instead, she tracked down Jessica Ames, now living 2 hours inland under her maiden name. It took Julia's resources and Evelyn's determination. Jessica was startled at first, pale and wary when she opened the door. "You shouldn't be here," she whispered. "I don't want revenge," Evelyn said. "I want the truth." Jessica hesitated, then stepped aside. "5 minutes," she said. "That's all I can give you." They sat in a quiet, sunlit living room. No photos of family, sparse furniture. Jessica looked older than Evelyn remembered, thinner. "Did he hurt you?" Evelyn asked. Jessica's silence answered before her words did. "He wasn't always like that. At first he was charming, supportive, but when I tried to end it, he threatened to ruin my career, said he could make it look like I was the one harassing him." Evelyn's breath caught. "You filed a restraining order." "And he retaliated, quietly, cut off references, spread rumors. Then he convinced me to give him another chance. That's when the affair started." "You're saying he manipulated you into it?" Jessica nodded. "He needed control, not love." Evelyn left with her heart pounding and hands shaking. The betrayal had layers she hadn't imagined. This wasn't just infidelity, it was a pattern, power, compulsion. Daniel wasn't just flawed, he was dangerous. Part 8. Reckoning. Evelyn didn't go home right away. She went to Julia. Together, they gathered what they could: Jessica's story, supporting documents, Daniel's sealed disciplinary warning from the Bar Association, old client complaints. Then Evelyn made a choice. She filed a sworn affidavit with the State Ethics Board and handed over everything to the prosecutor's office investigating Daniel. She didn't warn him, didn't call, didn't cry. Instead, she called her attorney and initiated divorce proceedings the next day. When Daniel found out, he showed up at the beach house unannounced. It was dusk. The air smelled of salt and rain. "You set me up," he said, voice low, trembling. Evelyn stood in the doorway, Mason asleep upstairs, the tide rising in the distance. "I protected the truth," she said. "Something you forgot how to do." He laughed, sharp, bitter. "You think this makes you strong? You just destroyed our family." "You did that," she said. "I'm just refusing to pretend anymore." Daniel didn't plead. He didn't raise his voice. He just looked at her for a long, terrible moment, and then he turned and walked back to his car. She watched until the headlights disappeared. Part 9. The future is a shifting thing. The months that followed were quiet but uncertain. Daniel lost his position at the firm. The case against him was still pending. He stopped fighting for full custody and accepted supervised visits. Jessica filed a new complaint. Evelyn testified in support. And yet, Evelyn didn't feel triumphant. There were days she still missed the man she thought he was. Nights when she questioned if she could have saved him or saved herself earlier. But Mason was laughing again. Her work was growing. Julia had become more than a confidant. And sometimes Evelyn woke up with a strange sense of peace, not happiness. Not yet, but the absence of fear. Final scene. Open shore. One morning, a year later, Evelyn sat on the porch of the beach house again. Mason played in the sand below. Julia brought out coffee. "You regret any of it?" Julia asked. Evelyn considered. "Only that I didn't leave sooner." "And him?" "I think part of him loved me, but another part of him needed to control everything around him to feel safe, including me. Julia nodded. And now? Evelyn watched the tide roll in, then back out again. Now I just want to raise my son with truth. No more lies. No more pretending. The breeze caught her hair. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled. But for now, the storm had passed. The ethics investigation had dragged on longer than anyone expected. Daniel's law license remained suspended, but he hadn't been disbarred yet. Jessica's testimony had strengthened the case, but there was no smoking gun. No single piece that fully revealed the monster behind the mask. Evelyn hated how often she still checked the court docket. Julia warned her, "He's waiting. He's not done." Evelyn tried not to believe it. She filled her days with work, parenting, therapy. She laughed more often, slept more soundly. Mason was thriving in school. The beach house had become more than a hideaway. It was a real home. But then in mid-October, something changed. It was small at first. A flat tire, 2 nails side by side, a strange email from a reporter asking about the divorce, the alleged affair, and her own possible role in Daniel's downfall, then a call from her bank. Someone had attempted to access her accounts using her old passwords. It was subtle, scattered. But Evelyn had lived inside Daniel's gaslit world for too long not to recognize the pattern. He was testing her defenses. Part 9. The shadow in the mirror. She confronted him one cold morning outside. The supervised visitation center. Mason was inside with the therapist. Daniel stood alone in the parking lot, tie loose, eyes sunken but smiling. "Are you coming undone, Evelyn?" he asked, almost playfully. "Are you trying to scare me?" she said, keeping her voice low and steady. "Why would I scare the mother of my child?" He leaned closer. "But you should know, the world loves a redemption story, and I've been writing mine." She didn't flinch. "You'll never be a victim in mine." Daniel's smile faltered. "You always underestimate me." "No," she said. "I finally see you for exactly who you are." And then she walked away. Inside her chest, though, her heart pounded like it had fists. Part 2. The choice. That night, Julia showed up with a folder. "An anonymous source sent this," she said. Inside were printouts of encrypted messages between Daniel and a new woman, a paralegal working under a defense attorney with ties to Daniel's old firm. The messages included plans, hints at falsified evidence, veiled references to Evelyn's mental health instability. It was a setup. He was building a case to reclaim full custody of Mason, to paint Evelyn as vengeful, unstable, unfit. Julia, close the folder. "We can leak this, or build a counter case, but you need to be ready. This isn't over." Evelyn stared out the window. Mason slept down the hall. The waves outside whispered against the shore. She had 2 choices: fight fire with fire, or vanish before the match was struck. Part 3. Fire or fog. The next few weeks passed in a blur of strategy meetings and legal filings. Evelyn didn't sleep much. She stopped going to the beach. She had nightmares again. Daniel's voice in the dark, whispering things she could never prove he said. Her lawyer, Tasha Leong, was direct. "If you stay, we go nuclear. We expose everything. But you will lose privacy. The press will dig. Mason will hear things too early. And if I leave, you give him power. But you protect your son." The night before the custody hearing, Evelyn sat on the porch and watched the ocean pull away from shore like it was holding its breath. Julia came outside. "You're thinking about running." "I'm thinking about ending it another way." "Evelyn." "No, not that." She exhaled. "I'm thinking about disappearing, starting over, changing our names, somewhere he can't touch us." Julia. leaned on the railing beside her. "You'd live your life hiding?" Evelyn shook her head. "I'd live it free. That's different." Part 14th. The bittersweet end-on. The morning of the custody hearing, Evelyn didn't show up. Her lawyer stalled as long as she could, but eventually she had to concede to the court. Evelyn Daniels was gone. Unreachable. Daniel looked smug when he walked out of the courthouse. He didn't know Evelyn had prepaid for everything. New names, new documents, a quiet town on the East Coast where no one would ask questions. She and Mason left the beach house in the middle of the night. She sent one message to Julia. "Tell him this wasn't an escape. It was a rescue." Epilogue. What remains years later, a woman named Elise Harmon works as a midwife in a small New England town. Her son Max is 12, curious, quiet, thoughtful. He doesn't remember much about Seattle. Sometimes Elise dreams of the ocean, but never the storms. Meanwhile, back in Washington, Daniel Daniels is disbarred, twice divorced, bitter, alone, and still wondering how he lost to the one person he thought he could always control. Evelyn stood outside the courthouse before dawn, her fingers wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee. She hadn't slept, but her mind was sharp, painfully clear. The folder Julia gave her sat heavy in her bag. She was done running. Let Daniel try to destroy her. She would show the world who he really was. Inside the courtroom, reporters filled the gallery. Daniel's team came in with smug grins and expensive suits. They looked at Evelyn like a cracked vase barely holding together. Daniel didn't even look at her. He didn't need to. He already thought he'd won. But when Judge Kravitz entered, Evelyn stood tall. Julia was beside her, flanked by their legal team and the forensic experts they'd hired. Tasha opened with fire. "We have evidence that Mr. Daniels has not only conspired to falsify psychological assessments of my client, but has also used his legal connections to intimidate witnesses and manipulate court proceedings. What's more, we now have digital proof." Gasps. Shifting in seats. The judge raised an eyebrow. "You'll need to prove that, Ms. Liang." Tasha smiled. "We intend to." Part 14th. The Reckoning. They presented encrypted messages between Daniel and the paralegal. They demonstrated how he planted stories through local blogs tied to anonymous shell accounts. A digital forensics expert testified that metadata matched Daniel's devices. Daniel's smirk faltered. He whispered furiously to his attorney. His hands trembled. Then Evelyn took the stand. She spoke not as a victim, but as a mother, as a woman who had clawed her way back from gaslighting, manipulation, and emotional captivity. Her voice never cracked. "He said I'd never survive without him, that I'd fall apart. But I'm still here, and I'm done pretending he's the victim." When Daniel tried to testify, he unraveled. Under cross-examination, his contradictions piled up. The judge halted proceedings midday to review additional material. That night, Evelyn sat on her porch with Julia and Mason. The boy was playing with a new chess set, humming to himself. "You're winning," Julia said quietly. Evelyn looked at her son. "I'm not trying to win anymore. I'm trying to heal." Part 15. The verdict. 3 weeks later, the court ruled in Evelyn's favor. Full custody, protective orders. A recommendation for Daniel to undergo psychiatric evaluation before any future supervised visits. Soon after, the state bar completed their review. Daniel Daniels was permanently disbarred. He appealed. He lost. The press moved on to newer scandals. But occasionally, Evelyn's name would pop up in articles about resilience, women's rights, legal abuse. People called her brave. She didn't feel brave. She felt exhausted, but free. Final scene. The beach, it's 2 years later. The beach house is still hers. Mason, now 10, runs through the tide with 2 friends from school. Evelyn watches from a striped chair, sunglasses on, a book resting on her knees, but long forgotten. Julia visits often. They laugh more now. Talk about opening a nonprofit for women caught in similar cycles. Sometimes Evelyn still wakes at 3 a.m. remembering things Daniel whispered. But now those memories feel like ghosts pressed against thick glass. She never remarried. She doesn't know if she ever will, but she's whole, and that, finally, is enough. Bitter-sweet ending options. Which version resonated more with you? The escape into peace or the battle for justice? Would you like to explore a sequel about Evelyn starting a nonprofit for women? A story from Daniel's point of view, facing the consequences? A twist where someone from her past, Jessica or Julia, hides a deeper secret? We'll begin with Evelyn trying to settle into a new rhythm, but healing, as she'll learn, rarely moves in straight lines. Part 15. The Weight of Silence. The victory felt strange. Everyone kept calling it a triumph, a landmark case. Evelyn's inbox overflowed with messages from advocacy groups, podcasts, publishers offering book deals, but in the weeks that followed, she found herself withdrawing. She couldn't stand crowds, didn't want to talk about Daniel or the trial. Even the sound of her name on the news made her stomach turn. Some nights she'd wake up gasping for air, drenched in sweat. Other nights, she couldn't sleep at all. The only place she felt okay was the beach. Not the shoreline, but further out, deep in the water just past where the waves broke. She'd float on her back, arms wide, and stare up at the sky until her body stopped shaking. Mason was doing better than she expected. Therapy helped. So did the distance from Daniel. But she saw shadows in his drawings sometimes, the way he erased things obsessively, the storm cloud over every sun. They were surviving, but just barely. Part 17. The envelope had arrived without a return address. Just a plain white envelope left in the mailbox of the beach house. Inside was a single photograph, a younger Julia, maybe mid-20s, sitting in a courtroom gallery. Next to her, Daniel. They weren't touching, but their bodies leaned together in a way that felt familiar. On the back of the photo, a note was scrawled in fine, sharp cursive. You trusted the wrong person first, then the wrong person again. Evelyn's breath caught. She stared at the photo for a long time before placing it under a lamp and studying the background. Old courtroom signage, dated by the case number. She called Julia, trying to keep her voice even. I need to ask you something, and I need the truth, no filters, Julia sighed. You got the photo, didn't you? Evelyn sat down. So it's real? Yes. But it's not what you think. Part 18. Confession. They met. In person that night. No wine, no laughter. Just two women sitting across from each other in a storm-lit kitchen. Julia's hands trembled as she lit a cigarette, something Evelyn hadn't seen her do in years. I met Daniel when I was 24, Julia said. Interning for a legal aid nonprofit. He was already rising, already charming. Evelyn's voice was barely a whisper. Did you sleep with him? Julia shook her head quickly. No. God, no, but I wanted to. For a while. Before I knew what he really was. He flirted, I flirted back. It was harmless at first. He liked the attention, and I felt powerful being chosen, Evelyn finished. Julia flinched. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because by the time I met you, it felt like ancient history, and I saw the way he looked at you. I thought, maybe he changed. And then when he started turning on you, I hated myself for not warning you sooner. Evelyn stared at her for a long time. So when you said you believed me, I meant it, every word. But I was also trying to atone, to erase my part, in how he became who he is. Part 99. Fractures, trust, once fractured, never fits quite the same again. Evelyn didn't cut Julia off completely, but something shifted between them. A space opened up where certainty used to be. She replayed old conversations in her head, little things, subtle cues she might have missed. It was like discovering a second betrayal underneath the first. She spoke about it with her therapist, who said something that stuck. You don't owe people unbroken trust just because they helped you heal. Sometimes the ones who rescue us still carry their own knives. Part Cax, the open door one. Sunday afternoon, Evelyn took Mason on a walk down to the cove. He collected shells while she sat on the rocks and watched the tide move in. He held up a white spiral shell. "This one's cracked," he said. She took it, examined the break. "Still beautiful," she murmured. He nodded. "Still works, too. You can hear the ocean." Evelyn pressed it to her ear and smiled. Later that evening, back at the house, she pulled out her laptop. She opened a blank document, title, "The Quiet Between Storms," and she began to write. Not about Daniel, not about court or crime or headlines. She wrote about what comes after, about trust fractured but not entirely lost, about surviving the fire and daring to rebuild in its shadow. Would you like to continue with Evelyn launching her nonprofit, which brings her into contact with another survivor holding dangerous secrets? A slow-burn romantic subplot where Evelyn cautiously opens herself to new love? A psychological turn where Evelyn investigates who sent the photograph and discovers a deeper conspiracy tied to Daniel's past? This path leads us into a psychological mystery rooted in Evelyn's past and Daniel's buried secrets, uncovering someone else who's been watching from the shadows, someone who knows things neither Evelyn nor Julia ever imagined. Part Dusty Wine. The Whisper Network. The second envelope arrived a week later. This time it was slid under the beach house's back door. No postage, no smudges. Just another photograph. This one of Evelyn and Mason walking hand in hand through the farmer's market, taken from a distance. Beneath the photo, another note, typed this time. He wasn't working alone. Look into Brent Holloway, 2007. Evelyn's stomach twisted. The name felt familiar but distant, like hearing a tune from a dream you can't quite remember. She dug through old court files, news clippings, articles. Brent Holloway. Then she found it. An ethics probe against Daniel's former law partner. The case was buried quietly, dismissed. No formal charges. A few keywords stood out in the summary. Intimidation tactics. Witness tampering. Dismissed on technicality. And one name buried at the end under redactions. E. Carter. Her maiden name. Part Foitoi. Reopened wounds. Evelyn met Brent once, years ago. She remembered his handshake. Too tight, like he was trying to prove something. He'd looked her up and down like a buyer assessing merchandise. She never liked him, but she never suspected anything deeper. Julia's voice trembled when Evelyn brought it up. "I thought that case was sealed." "You knew about it?" "I wasn't involved. But Daniel, he bragged once, said he got Brent out of a career-ending mess, that he made things disappear. And I'm the thing that disappeared, aren't I?" Evelyn whispered. Julia blinked. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone made me forget, or look away. And maybe they used people like Brent to make that happen." Partway through. The survivor Evelyn contacted a journalist she trusted, a quiet, methodical woman named Dahlia Ames, who had covered family court corruption for years. After Evelyn shared what she found, Dahlia's silence on the phone was long and heavy. "I've heard that name before," Dahlia finally said. "Brent Holloway. One of my sources." She wouldn't go on record, but she mentioned something about Holloway and Daniels running a containment strategy for vulnerable women, settlements, discrediting, making them seem unstable. Evelyn's throat dried. "How many women?" "I don't know," Dahlia replied. but I can try to find one who survived it. Part 43. The other Evelyn. Her name was Leah Hannigan, mid-40s now. Lived off the grid in a cabin in northern Vermont. It took weeks to arrange a meeting, but Leah agreed on one condition: Evelyn had to come alone. Evelyn drove through heavy snow to meet her. When she stepped inside Leah's cabin, the air smelled like cedar and wood smoke. "I remember you," Leah said. "You testified in the 2007 hearing. You were just an intern then." Evelyn's knees buckled slightly. I did?" You were flustered. "But you said Brent made you uncomfortable, that you saw him shred documents late at night. Then, your statement was withdrawn." "I don't remember giving it." "Exactly," Leah said darkly. Leah poured tea. "They used methods, pressure, gaslighting. In some cases, they used a therapist tied to their firm to reframe memory loss as dissociation or anxiety. They built cases around silencing. Daniel was just more charming than Brent, but just as dangerous." Evelyn stared at the fire, a chill crawling over her. "Why now? Why am I remembering?" "Because someone wants the truth out," Leah said. "But it's not out of kindness. They're playing you. The real question is, who sent the photo?" Part X5. The man in the background back. In her beach house, Evelyn took out both photographs, studied them side by side. Something clicked. It wasn't just Julia in the courtroom photo. In the blurry crowd behind her, someone else. A man with a sharp jaw, sandy hair, and a small scar beneath his eye. She grabbed an old wedding photo, Daniel's side of the aisle. There he was again. Not Brent. Someone else. She used facial recognition software and cross-referenced against. Public records: name Miles Donahue. Occupation: former private investigator. Last known employer: Holloway and Daniels LLP. Status: missing since 2009. To be continued. Would you like the next chapter to follow Evelyn tracking down Miles, piecing together the web of manipulation? Reveal that Mason may also have been targeted for leverage, pulling in an element of danger, dive deeper into Julia's potential involvement, perhaps uncovering a betrayal she's not admitting? Part X66. The uninvited guessed it began with the knock, 3 short raps, barely audible against the hiss of the ocean wind. Evelyn opened the door cautiously, half expecting Dahlia or Julia, but it was a stranger, or almost. He looked vaguely familiar. Clean-cut, dark winter coat, cautious eyes. He held up a faded leather wallet. Private investigator license. Name, Miles Donahue. "I know you've been looking into me," he said. "Now it's my turn to talk." Part X7. The recording. They sat in the kitchen. Evelyn didn't offer him tea. She didn't need to. Miles slid a flash drive across the table. "Everything's on there: audio, statements, copies of files. I've been gathering it for years. I didn't disappear. I went into hiding." Evelyn stared. "Why come to me now?" "Because it's no longer about Daniel," Miles said quietly. "It's about who he sold you out to. The network goes higher. Judges, custody experts, real estate developers funneling properties through manipulated divorce settlements. You were a test case." Evelyn's voice was hoarse. "What about Mason?" Miles hesitated. "He was never supposed to meet you. He was recruited. After Daniel." Her pulse spiked. "What do you mean, recruited?" "He was meant to soften you, gain your trust, stabilize you, but he broke protocol. He fell in love." Part 8. Doubt Evelyn waited until Miles left. Then she loaded the flash drive. There were audio clips of meetings between Daniel and Brent, legal memos about patient leverage, case files stamped confidential with the names of multiple women marked as volatile or containment priority, and then a contract from a consulting firm called Cohere Strategies. Recipient: Mason Grant. Scope: client engagement. behavioral stability, passive monitoring. She didn't cry. Not at first. She just sat still, holding her breath so long she saw stars. Part 99. The confrontation. When Mason came home that evening, Evelyn didn't say a word. She just handed him the flash drive. He didn't even try to deny it. "I was hired?" he said. "Yes, but I didn't know what it was. Not fully. Not at first. I was told you were being watched by a dangerous ex and needed support. I thought I was doing something good. Until you saw the money," Evelyn said flatly. Mason's voice cracked. "Until I saw you, and I realized I wasn't acting anymore." He stepped closer. She stepped back. "You lied to me every day. I didn't know how to stop." Mason whispered, "I tried. I wanted to tell you, Eve, I broke the contract. I walked away from them. That's why Miles came to you, because I warned him." "You warned him because you were scared they'd find out you love me," Evelyn said. "That's not love. That's survival." She didn't ask him to leave, but she didn't ask him to stay either. That night, he packed a small bag and drove into the dark. Part XXX. The Crossroads. 2 days later, Julia called again. "I don't know how much more you want to know," she said. "But if you want to finish it, if you want to destroy them, you'll need to go public. Use the files. Expose Brent, Daniel, and everyone connected." "And Mason?" Evelyn asked. A pause. "Collateral damage," Julia said. Evelyn hung up. Without responding, she sat on the porch until morning, watching the waves roll in and out. The sun bled orange across the water like something wounded. Epilogue. The letter 1 week later, Mason left a letter in her mailbox. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I broke something I can't fix. But I loved you. That wasn't a lie. I know you don't believe me right now, but I hope, someday, you'll remember me for more than how we ended. I'll be in New Hampshire, off the grid. If you ever need help burning it all down, just say the word." Evelyn stared at the letter long after the sun set. Then she picked up her phone, dialed Dahlia's number, and said, "I'm ready. Would you like the next section to follow Evelyn and Dahlia preparing to go public, risking everything for justice? Explore Mason's exile, uncovering who else he may have betrayed or protected. Introduce a final twist, that Evelyn was never the target at all, but someone else was?" Dahlia arrived that night, quiet as a ghost in a black peacoat. Her energy was razor-sharp, different from the woman Evelyn first met. Now she was something else, more than a lawyer, less than safe. Evelyn slid the flash drive across the table. "You said we could burn it down." "Let's do it." Dahlia arched an eyebrow. "You sure?" "I've been sure since the moment Daniel told me I was being paranoid," Evelyn said. "I just didn't know who else was lying." Dahlia plugged in her laptop. "Then we need to start building a firewall. Because once this goes live, they'll come after you." Evelyn nodded. "Let them." Part XXX. The network. They worked for days, gathering names, patterns, timestamps. Evelyn pored over court documents, redacted files, and dozens of legal settlements that, on the surface, looked clean. But there it was. A pattern of domestic instability manufactured on paper, fueled by false psychiatric evaluations, ghost consultants, and private investigators who manipulated evidence to control outcomes. Victims were made to look unstable, dangerous, unfit parents. In the end, many of them disappeared, either publicly disgraced, locked in psych wards, or quietly exiled from their children's lives. Mason had been one of many operatives, some deeper than others, some just tools, others true believers. And Brent. He wasn't just a lawyer, he was a gatekeeper. Part E. Creel. The ultimatum. Evelyn left a package on Brent Calloway's doorstep at midnight. Inside was a copy of the contract Mason had signed. 3 client files with altered medical records. A photo of Brent meeting with Judge Halleck and a single line typed in black. Resign quietly, or I'll make you the first domino. By noon the next day, Brent Calloway issued a statement citing health concerns and withdrew from all open cases. That same evening, Evelyn received a message from an encrypted number. "You don't know what you've started. Stop now." She stared at it for a while, then typed a single reply. "Try me. Part 20th Street." The ghost of Mason. It was 2 weeks before she heard from him again. A single voicemail. Mason's voice, frayed but clear. "You're in the storm now. They'll hit." From every angle. Legally, financially, even emotionally. "Be ready. You'll start doubting everyone, including yourself. But I'm still with you, Eve. From the outside. I can't undo what I did, but I can help keep them off your back. I owe you that. There's something you don't know yet. About Daniel. About how far this goes. When you're ready, come find me." Part XXXV. The Trial. Before the trial, Dahlia filed for a subpoena under the Whistleblower Protection Act. Julia agreed to testify. So did Miles. The court date was set. Evelyn stood at the edge of the courtroom watching as reporters gathered outside. Her palms were sweaty. Her heart drummed like war. Mason hadn't called since the voicemail. His silence carved at her more than Daniel's betrayal ever had. This wasn't justice. Not yet. But it was a beginning. Bittersweet ending, open-ended. That night, Evelyn walked the beach alone. She could keep going. She could burn every last name on that list, or she could vanish. Start again. Leave the ruins to smolder and find a life untouched by betrayal and law. The wind whipped her hair into her eyes, and she smiled bitterly. There were no clean slates anymore. But there were choices, and this time, she'd be the one making them. Would you like to continue with a deeper investigation into Daniel's full role and who he really works for? A fast-forward showing what Evelyn chooses a year later. Vengeance, healing, or something in between? Mason's perspective, revealing what he's discovered on the run? Evelyn was boxing up old things when she found it. A dusty envelope buried inside a shoebox of Daniel's college memorabilia. They were younger in the photo. Daniel was laughing, arms around two men in suits, at what looked like a private fundraiser. One of the men was Brent Calloway, the other was Senator Edward Trask. Daniel had always told her that law school was a struggle, that his first job had been clerking for a small, struggling firm. But this photo, taken at a private estate, dated 1998, told a different story. Evelyn flipped the photo over, written in Daniel's handwriting. To the future. No witnesses, no mistakes. Part 6 Ghosts of Trask, with Dahlia's help, Evelyn traced Senator Trask's old ties, donations to private consulting firms, sealed court records from custody cases, quiet buyouts of former spouses, and then something bigger. A shell company called Hawthorne Risk Solutions, registered under Brent Calloway's late father's name. Its address was a P.O. box, but its cash flow came from federal grants earmarked for mental health crisis support. It wasn't just about Evelyn. They were manufacturing instability for profit, and Daniel was a recruiter. Her hands shook as she whispered, "He didn't just throw me under the bus. I was his audition." Part 8. The reunion. She didn't go to the police. Not yet. Instead, she drove north. Hours of coastal fog, cheap coffee, and that letter from Mason burning in her coat pocket. She found him at a tiny cabin outside Lake Sunapee. His hair was longer, his face leaner. But when he opened the door and saw her, he didn't speak. Just stepped aside and let her in. Inside, a bulletin board covered in red string and photos. "I knew you'd come," Mason said softly. "You found Trask." She nodded. He poured whiskey into a chipped mug. "You ready to take it all down?" "I'm ready to know everything," she said. Then I'll decide what burns. Part X Yansnath. Mason's truth. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He just gave her facts. Daniel had approached him a year before the divorce, offering a way out of crippling debt in exchange for a monitoring assignment. Mason hadn't known Evelyn's name at first, but when he did, he nearly walked. When he fell for her, they tried to reassign him. He refused. That's when they sent Brent. He knew about the fake psychiatric evaluation, the doctored medical records, but not the custody sabotage. He was supposed to report back every week. He stopped. That's why Trask cut him loose. I never thought I'd see you again, he said, eyes rimmed red. But if you want to end this, I'm in. All the way. Part XL. The decision. They stayed up until dawn, mapping files, organizing leaks, preparing for a media detonation that could rip through courtrooms, destroy campaigns, and rewrite Evelyn's past into something sharp and uncontrollable. But even as they planned, Evelyn hesitated. Once this is out there, she said, I'm not Evelyn Shaw anymore. I'm the woman who brought it all down, the woman who married the monster, who trusted the spy, who lost her mind and got it back just in time to burn the house down. Mason took her hand gently. Then let them know exactly who you are. Bittersweet ending. For now. Evelyn stood by the cabin window as the sun rose over the lake. She didn't know if she'd forgive Mason. Not yet. She didn't know what would happen when the world saw her story, but she was done hiding, done doubting, and if Daniel Trask and Brent Calloway wanted war, she'd give them one. A journalist named Jessa Pham published the first expose featuring damning excerpts from internal Hawthorne Risk Solutions files, manipulated court documents, and a web of political donations linking Brent Calloway to Trask's shadow network. Evelyn's story was front and center. They called me unstable, unfit, paranoid. But I wasn't the only one. By noon, hashtags were trending. By sundown, networks were calling for Trask to resign. Brent Calloway's home was swarmed by reporters. His wife filed for divorce. But the most surreal moment came at dusk, when Evelyn watched Daniel on the news. I had no knowledge of these documents, he said, in his perfect tailored suit and sympathetic tone. My heart goes out to my former wife. Mental illness is a terrible thing. I hope she finds peace. Evelyn stared at the screen. Her jaw clenched. He's still gaslighting you, Mason muttered behind her, even with the whole world watching. Part Kyaungd. The counterattack, 2 days later, Evelyn received a summons. Daniel was suing her for defamation. The irony wasn't lost on her. Dahlia stormed into the cabin with a file under her arm and a rage. That could have lit the lake on fire. He's got friends still on the bench, she growled. But we've got proof. If we go to court, it becomes public record. No more sealed files. You sure you want this smoke? Evelyn didn't hesitate. Let it burn. Part X3. Daniel unmasked. What Daniel hadn't expected was Julia, the assistant he once dismissed, the one he berated quietly when no one was listening. She came forward with voicemails, emails, a list of shadow meetings he'd had with Brent, and Miles, the IT tech, provided the link to the fake psychiatric evaluations. Evelyn hadn't imagined it. She'd been targeted with a precise algorithm, designed to fabricate instability in court. Dahlia smirked as she read it in court. A system built to silence women who ask too many questions. Mr. Shaw, tell me, did you create this algorithm yourself, or just sponsor it with your campaign? Donors? Daniel stared blankly, hands folded, jaw ticking. For once, he said nothing. Part X Live, the question of justice. Daniel was indicted on charges of conspiracy and fraud. Brent fled the country. Trask resigned, claiming health reasons, though rumors of a quiet federal investigation spread like wildfire. And Evelyn? She was offered a settlement, a quiet payout, an NDA, in exchange for her silence going forward. She stared at the paper. 7 figures, a clean slate, no public testimony, no book, no interviews, no court, just peace, but it felt like blood money. Mason leaned on the railing beside her. You sign it, you disappear, you walk, maybe you heal. And if I don't? He gave her a sad smile. Then you become a name they can't erase, a fire they can't contain. Part XLV. The decision, Evelyn folded the NDA, then slowly, deliberately set it on fire. It curled into black ash on the wind. She didn't need the money. She needed to live without fear again. Epilogue. 6 months later, the lawsuit was dropped. Evelyn declined every press request. The world moved on to new scandals, new betrayals. But a few people remembered. A battered judge ruled in favor of a mother whose mental health had once been weaponized against her. A lawyer started digging into sealed custody records in other states, and a quiet, persistent journalist named Jessa kept the pressure on Trask's replacement. Evelyn bought a small bookstore on the edge of the city. Mason visited sometimes, but never stayed. There were moments she missed him, moments she hated him, and moments in the dark when she didn't know what forgiveness should even feel like. But she wasn't afraid anymore, not of Daniel, not of the past, and not of herself. The bookstore was quiet on a rainy Tuesday afternoon, the only sound the soft tap of rain against the windows. Evelyn stood behind the counter, flipping through a stack of new releases. Her fingers were steady now, no longer betraying the nerves she had once carried like weight. It had been 3 years since the chaos of the trial, the media storm, and the storm of her own heart. The bookstore was hers now, quiet, unassuming, a space where she could breathe, think, and slowly rebuild her life. She'd spent the early years just putting one foot in front of the other, focusing on the mundane. Inventory, customer orders, organizing events. Slowly, it had become more than just a business. It was her sanctuary, a reminder that there were still things in the world worth protecting, worth loving. But even here, in her peaceful corner of the world, the past still lingered. Part XV. A familiar face. It was early evening when the doorbell chimed. Evelyn glanced up from her book, startled to see Mason standing in the doorway. He hadn't called. He hadn't come by in over a year. His presence, once a comfort, now felt like a weight on her chest. "Mason," she said, her voice hesitant. "What are you doing here?" He didn't speak at first, just stepped inside, his eyes flickering around the shop. He looked older now, grayer at the temples. There was a weariness to him, the kind that didn't come from age but from living with secrets too long. "Can we talk?" His voice was rough, as if he hadn't spoken much in weeks. Evelyn nodded slowly, the soft tension between them palpable. She led him to the back room, where the shelves were lined with books on art, philosophy, and poetry. The room was a sanctuary within a sanctuary, a space where she found peace. "Have a seat," she said, gesturing to a worn armchair. "What's going on?" Mason hesitated, glancing down at his hands. Then, without warning, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "It's about Trask," he said, his voice low. Evelyn frowned. "What about him? I thought you were done with all of that." "I was. But," Mason shifted uncomfortably, "someone else is trying to cover up the last of the corruption. They're going after the evidence again. I can't just let it go." Evelyn's heart skipped. She had thought it was all over. That the fight, the betrayal, the years of sleepless nights were behind her. But Mason's eyes told her everything she needed to know. This wasn't finished. "Why now?" she asked, her voice tight. "Why after all this time?" Mason's gaze dropped to the envelope in his hands, and his expression softened. Because the people who are still pulling the strings aren't just in Washington. They're here, local, and they're making sure the damage goes unnoticed. That's why I've been keeping track of the records. Someone's trying to erase them, and they're getting closer. Part X Lut. The ghosts of the past Evelyn's fingers curled around the envelope as she looked at him. It was happening again. The same machinery of lies, deceit, and betrayal that had nearly destroyed her life was still turning. And now, it was threatening to undo everything she had built. "I can't go back to that life," she whispered. "I can't destroy everything again." Mason's gaze softened. He knew the cost of fighting, the toll it took on people, on relationships. "I understand, but this time it's not just about you. It's about everyone else they've hurt. You can't walk away from this now, Evelyn, not when it's this close." She looked down at the envelope, then back at Mason. She had spent years running from this, from him, from the pain, from the haunting reality of what had happened. But, now standing here, with him again, she felt a surge of something deeper than fear. A sense of duty, maybe. Or justice. It was a call she hadn't expected, one she couldn't ignore. "I can't do this alone," she said softly, the words coming out more as a confession than a statement. "I'm not asking you to," Mason replied. "I never left. I've always been here. Part X now." The reckoning over the next few weeks, Evelyn and Mason worked together again. Not as lovers, but as partners in a cause that had never truly let them go. They met with reporters, digging into the files Mason had kept hidden. They spoke to whistleblowers, unearthing more details of Trask's corruption and the new players who were trying to push the same agenda. Every day, they chipped away at the old lies. Every night, Evelyn returned home to the bookstore sitting, alone in the quiet and letting the weight of what they were doing settle in her bones. It wasn't easy. The old wounds were still there, fresh, raw, but there was a kind of redemption in it. Not for Daniel, not for Trask, but for her. She would not let them win again. Part L, the choice. One afternoon, just as Evelyn was locking up, the phone rang. It was Dahlia. "I've got news," Dahlia said, her voice sharp with urgency. "You need to see this." Evelyn's heart raced as she opened her email. Dahlia had sent over a confidential memo detailing a new case that had been filed. One, connected to the same people they had been exposing. Evelyn stared at the screen, feeling the coldness of déjà vu. It was happening again. But this time, she wasn't running. Epilogue. A new kind of freedom. Months passed. The files kept coming. The reporters kept digging. And the truth, the real truth, started to break through the cracks. The people who had once tried to bury Evelyn were now scrambling to erase every last bit of evidence. But Evelyn wasn't afraid anymore. She had rebuilt herself, her life. She had faced her demons and chosen her own path. Whether the world ever knew the full story or not didn't matter anymore, because she knew the truth. And that was enough. Evelyn paced back and forth in the dim light of her back office, hands clasped behind her back, her eyes fixed on the city skyline outside the window. Her thoughts churned like a storm. It had been a year since she and Mason started reopening the investigation into Trask's network. They had laid the groundwork, uncovered buried secrets, and exposed every last thread of corruption that had tied Trask and his allies together. But now a new enemy had emerged, a more sophisticated web of influence lurking in the background, obscured by powerful financial backers and political connections. The memo from Dahlia was clear. The new figures were ruthless and far more dangerous than Trask and his old crew. They had deep pockets. They had influence at the highest levels of government. And they were connected to a new real estate development project in the city that Evelyn had once thought was legitimate. But now, it was clear it was a smokescreen for something darker. Mason had found the threads. They led directly to a man named Elliot Kane, a real estate mogul with an uncanny ability to stay out of legal trouble. His company, Kane Group, had been behind every major development in the city for the last decade. On the surface, he was a philanthropist, a man of the people. Beneath it all, though, Evelyn had learned, he was a kingmaker in the shadows. But Kane wasn't alone. He had ties to both local law enforcement and several well-placed corporate executives. It was a tangled web, and Evelyn wasn't sure who could be trusted anymore. Part Lie, the face of the enemy. Mason, Evelyn said, her voice tight as she spoke into the phone. This isn't just about Kane. It's about something much bigger. There's a real estate scheme that's about to displace thousands of people in this city. They're using corruption as a cover. Mason's voice crackled through the line. And they think they can silence us, don't they? They'll do whatever it takes to keep us from finding the proof. Evelyn's gaze was fixed on the city, streets below. I don't know who I can trust anymore, not even Dahlia. We need to be careful. This feels different. The line was silent for a moment. Mason knew exactly what she was getting at. What are you thinking? Evelyn's jaw clenched. I'm thinking it's time we confront them. Kane has too many strings in the city. We need to go straight to the source. Part Lee, setting the trap. They needed leverage, and the only way to get it was to walk directly into Kane's territory. The plan was set. The next morning, Evelyn found herself in a sleek office building at the heart of the city's financial district, walking through marble halls and past towering glass windows. Kane's office was at the top, but this wasn't just a casual visit. Evelyn had invited him under the guise of a business deal. She had a new project to propose, one that would generate massive profits, one that promised to align with his interests. But underneath her professional demeanor, Evelyn's pulse quickened. She knew what was at stake here. One wrong move, and she would be swallowed whole by the system she had been trying to expose. Mason had warned her, "Don't let him see you coming. He's dangerous, Evelyn," and that warning had never felt more real than now. Part Live. The conversation. Kane was everything Evelyn had imagined, and more. Confident, charming, well-dressed, with an air of calculated indifference that masked his ruthlessness. As she entered his office, the glass walls offered an almost panoramic view of the city, but it was the sharpness in his eyes that held her attention. He knew who she was. He knew why she was there. Evelyn took a seat across from him, her heart beating faster than she'd like to admit. "So, Ms. Shaw," Kane said, his voice smooth, "what is it that brings you to my humble domain today?" Evelyn offered him a polite smile, forcing herself to sound casual. "I'm not here for business, not exactly. I'm here because we both know this city isn't what it seems." Kane's eyes flickered. He didn't say anything, but Evelyn could see the slight tightening in his jaw. She pressed on, lowering her voice. "You've been playing a dangerous game, Elliot, and people are starting to notice." For a moment, there was only silence. Then Kane leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're wasting my time, Ms. Shaw. I don't have patience for games." But Evelyn wasn't finished. She slid an envelope across the desk. "I think this will change your mind." Inside the envelope was the evidence they had gathered: financial transactions, emails, even an encrypted message from one of Kane's high-ranking associates. It wasn't enough to bring him down yet, but it was a start. Kane's gaze flickered over the documents, and for a brief moment the facade cracked. "So you think you've won?" he said, his voice cold. "This is just the beginning, Evelyn. You have no idea what you're up against." Evelyn didn't flinch. "I know exactly what I'm up against, and you're not going to stop me." Part LV. The Reckoning. The following days were filled with a flurry of phone calls, urgent messages, and the growing realization that Evelyn's confrontation with Kane had triggered something even darker than she'd anticipated. The higher-ups, in the city, those with the deepest pockets, were making moves to silence her. But Evelyn wasn't backing down. She had already come too far. Then came the warning. A note slipped under her office door. "You've made a mistake, Evelyn. This city belongs to us. Leave now, or we'll show you what real power looks like." Mason was on his way over when Evelyn read it. But she wasn't scared. She was determined. She had come this far. There was no going back now. Part LVI. The price of justice. It had been weeks since Evelyn and Mason had gathered the last of the evidence against Kane and his allies. Every day, she waited for the other shoe to drop. Finally, the decision came down. The city government launched an investigation into Kane Group's activities. The scandal exploded in the press. And although Kane remained defiant, the damage was done. But Evelyn knew the cost. It wasn't just the public victory that mattered. The deeper she dug, the more enemies she made, the more isolated she felt. Mason had offered her an out, a chance to leave it all behind, to step away from the fight and reclaim her life. But Evelyn refused. She couldn't stop now. The city was hers again, and this time, she wasn't going anywhere. The investigation into Kane Group had shaken the city to its core. As the media circus unfolded, Evelyn's name became synonymous with courage, defiance, and the truth. A stark contrast to the carefully constructed facade of power Kane had built. Despite the public pressure, she remained focused on the goal. This was not just about exposing corruption anymore. It was personal. Evelyn had spent years watching powerful people twist the system to their will, and now it was her turn to be the one pulling the strings. But even as the investigation deepened and the city's elite tried to distance themselves from Kane, the real danger loomed closer. Kane wasn't finished. He wasn't going down without a fight. And this time, he wasn't going to use the law to protect himself. He was going to strike from the shadows. Part late. Shadows of Power. Evelyn's phone buzzed late one evening as she was going over the final details of the case. It was a text from Mason. "They know we're coming for them. Kane's people are making moves. I'm putting you on a plane. We're meeting in D.C. tomorrow morning." She stood still for a moment, the weight of it all sinking in. She had been expecting this. There was no way Kane wouldn't retaliate. The moment they had stepped into his world, the game had changed. But the truth was, Evelyn was tired. Not just from the fight, but from what it had done to her life. She had sacrificed so much, and yet, as she looked out over the city, she couldn't shake the feeling that the price would only keep rising. Mason was the one constant in her life. Now, the one person who had stuck by her through it all. But even their relationship had changed. They no longer had the easy connection they once did. The lines between friendship and something more blurred, and that tension was palpable. But there were more immediate threats at hand. They were about to take the final swing at Kane. Evelyn knew that once they did, there was no going back. Kane wouldn't hesitate to destroy anyone who stood in his way. She had to be ready to make that sacrifice, or lose everything she had fought for. Part lie. The Plan DC was a blur. The constant rush of meetings, calls, and strategy sessions made Evelyn feel like she was running in circles. Mason had been working tirelessly with a group of journalists, financial experts, and even a few disillusioned members of Kane's inner circle to collect the last pieces of evidence they needed. It was all coming to a head. The plan was simple. Get the final, irrefutable proof that Kane had orchestrated massive financial fraud, not just locally, but internationally. They had uncovered links to offshore accounts, hidden investments, and high-level connections that would put him and his entire empire at risk. They were ready to expose it all. But even with the evidence, Evelyn knew they needed to move quickly. Once Kane caught wind of what they were about to do, he would pull every string to bury them. Part LX. The Confrontation. The night of the confrontation arrived sooner than expected. It was in a hotel suite just outside the city where Evelyn and Mason, with their team, laid out the final pieces of the puzzle. Kane had made his move. He knew they were getting close. And in retaliation, he'd tried to undermine them, leaking false stories, using his power to discredit them, even attempting to turn key witnesses against them. But Evelyn wasn't swayed. She had seen this game before. This time, she was leading it. The phone rang in the suite. It was Mason's call. She knew the plan was set into motion. "Evelyn," Mason's voice came through, calm but urgent. "Kane just called a meeting. It's happening tonight. You're in the game now. If you want to end it, we do this now. No more waiting." She knew this moment. This was the end game. Her fingers clenched around the papers before her. They were ready. This was it. There was no turning back. Part LXI. The choice, the next few hours were a whirlwind. Evelyn and Mason made their way to a lavish building downtown, one of the last safe havens for people like Kane. The boardrooms high above the city were now a battlefield. As they approached the entrance, a chill ran through Evelyn's body. She had no idea what would happen next. They were here to confront Kane. But as they stepped into the building's sleek lobby, something unexpected happened. A phone call came in from an anonymous source. The voice on the other end was familiar. It was Dahlia, the one person Evelyn thought she could trust. "There's more, Evelyn," Dahlia said, her voice trembling. I didn't want you to know, but Kane isn't the only one in on this. I was part of it. I didn't want to be, but I was. They have everyone, including the authorities, including you." Evelyn's heart dropped. The room seemed to spin. "What do you mean?" Evelyn's voice was cold, steely now, holding back the shock. "I didn't have a choice," Dahlia continued. "I thought we could expose it, but this is deeper than we realized. They're everywhere, Evelyn. You can't win this." Part L23. The Final Choice. The meeting with Kane was tense, a final reckoning. He had expected her, knowing she'd come. But this wasn't just business anymore. It was a clash of ideals. "Evelyn, you've made a mistake. You think this city will change? That your little vendetta will make a difference?" Kane's voice was slow, almost pitying. "You've played this game long enough to know that power wins in the end," he continued, his gaze cold. But Evelyn wasn't swayed. She had no more fear in her. The truth, whether he liked it or not, was coming to light. Kane had underestimated the depth of her resolve. "You've made a mistake, Elliot," Evelyn replied softly, stepping forward with a glint in her eye. "This city will change no matter who stands in the way." Part L3. The aftermath, the fallout from the meeting was swift. The investigation escalated, and Evelyn found herself at the center of a media storm. Kane's empire started to crumble, but it didn't fall overnight. The connections he had in place were still powerful. Yet, the truth had found a way to the surface, and there was no denying it now. In the aftermath, Evelyn was left standing in the ruins of her own creation. She had won, but the cost was high.